Welcome to Bamfordrose, and it's forum chat time. Before we get into this week's forum chat, it really helps us if you can like, subscribe and comment to our videos. This week I've got 3 or 4 forum chats lined up, and we'll look at them real time this time, make it a bit more interesting. Topic of this one is like the sort of technical statements and things being discussed and concluded on forums. Often it's blind leading the blind, and there's not a lot of technical know-how going on. So I just wanted to bring that to life a bit. First one is someone that's purchased a set of GTE, GT8s, GT4, well, they're race car manifolds, which exit on the side sill, but just behind the driver's front wheel, and thinks that they're going to fit them to the car. Now, in terms of styling, I can sort of get why the side exit pipes would be desirable. In terms of the sound quality, well, you might hear that GTE car going around the track, but it hasn't really got an inlet manifold induction system, so to speak. It's got a big foam motorsporty air filter across the top of the plenum chamber, and half of that car's attractive sound is induction roar, which obviously on the road car you're going to get very little, if any, due to noise regulation, tuning induction roar out. I mean, induction roar, when it's tuned to sound really, really nice, is actually better than a loud exhaust note. You know, induction roar is powerful. It's just got a great sound characteristic to it. But in terms of the automaker having to pass noise drive-by legislation, you know, they've got about 75 dB to comply with, and they've got to get tyre noise, wind noise and exhaust noise to fit all within that restriction. So that's why you couldn't really engineer an amount of induction roar into the standard production car. So these exhaust manifolds, I know of about 4 people that have bought either this set or other sets. And you know, what's the reason you're fitting them to the car? Primarily it should be because you're bolting something on which adds more power, more torque, more drivability, makes the car more usable on the road. So you know, you just have to look at the primary pipe length, and experience or any knowledge of how this engine performs is going to say that that is just going to wipe away any low speed torque. So the peak of torque is going to be reduced, the peak of power is going to be increased, and it's going to push it further up the rev range. So on your road car, where you're not going to change that peak engine speed, on a road car where you're going to need torque, or you don't want to lose low speed torque, else you will lose acceleration coming out of corners, on throttle tip-ins, that sort of stuff, then you know, it's not really the best thing to do. Heat management. It's going to kick a phenomenal amount of heat up through the sills, heat up the door area, heat up your internal cabin in a way that your road car has not been designed to expel or stop that heat from radiating. So not just performance, heat management is going to be tricky. But I mean, this has already got a load of comments because it's actually pretty impossible to fit these exhaust manifolds to a V8 Vantage. It's going to clash the lower part of the front subframe, it's going to clash the chassis, it's going to mean that brake module and a load of stuff that's mounted in certain places is going to need to be moved. And there are people on here that point that out to the chap. Yeah, he still thinks he's going to carry on with the modification. There's absolutely no feedback on there about, you know, why are you doing this? Because actually you're going to wipe a load of low speed torque off. You're going to gain some power in the region that you won't be able to realize it because you're not going to up your engine rev limit to that amount. Heat management isn't discussed, sound quality isn't discussed because it isn't going to match the GTE car. So it just really questions why you would go to so much bother to fit something that isn't going to tick any improvement box. Next, we've got a look at a series of threads, discussions about lightweight flywheel and twin plate clutch. A lot of these discussions arise because there's one garage out there that's giving the information off that, hey, it's an error state, you shouldn't fit the lightweight flywheel and twin plate clutch to a car. Then I've seen another post on here, probably because this guy has read all of those sorts of chats, and he's felt motivated enough to contact the factory and say, hey, should I fit a lightweight flywheel and twin plate clutch to my car? Obviously the factory's come back with quite a comical answer, as they would do, discouraging it. But you know, let's just think about the technicalities behind this. The clutch is simply a switch to separate engine from gearbox when you want to change gear or pull away. So we're taking a single plate clutch out, we're putting a twin plate clutch in. The twin plate clutch is going to have more friction material contact surface area, which is what it's all about. This is going to stop the barbecuing of the single plate clutch because it's just not beefy enough to pull away with, especially under an extreme pull away where heat is going to be generated. So it's got much more contact surface area acting as the on-off switch. What else is going to change? Well, the stroke that the slave cylinder has to go through to perform the switching is going to be different single plate to twin plate. So a lot of these discussions arise around the sport shift because the factory don't sell their version of the twin plate upgrade clutch for sport shift. They only sell it for manual. So it's asked, or that's made sport shift people ask a lot of questions. And there's one particular independent garage known for sales, not really known for its workshop, giving out the message that it's an error state to fit that upgrade. So I just want to talk about the specifics behind this. So it's a switch. The slave cylinder is going to go through a different stroke to clamp and release the clutch. So if you have changed in the sport shift transmission mapping that stroke that the slave cylinder is going to go through to achieve that, then transmission control unit, which is acting as the human brain to operate the hydraulic circuit to control clutch, knows when it needs to make the switch, and now it's being recalibrated to tell it what the stroke of the slave cylinder is going to be to perform the switch. So that's as easy as it is. It's a clutch. It performs a switching job, and there's so much hype and hysteria and questions given to it that I don't understand. So why didn't the factory, when they came out with their AMR clutch upgrade kit, why didn't they fit it to sport shift? It's a very good question. They could have done. There's no reason why that AMR kit with a remap to the transmission control unit to alter the slave cylinder switching, there's no reason why that kit won't go on a sport shift. They didn't for some reason. I can only guess, and it is just guesswork, that they get so much headache and grief from sport shifts in general that when they sell an upgraded product to that car, they just don't want to open the door to yet further grief because someone spent money on an upgrade and perhaps it's not worked properly. Sport shifts can be a bit quirky, and sometimes there's poor shifting cars which, when they have an upgrade, remain poor shifting cars. You can normally get to the bottom of this. There's normally an input to the system, an electrical parameter that's inputting data that's normally not correct for some reason. It could be as wacky as the tracker module is affecting a signal going up the CAN communication network to the transmission control module, and this is causing poor shift. The way that the parking sensor module is wired in with the same communication network line as the transmission control module, if water gets in that and that outputs a screwy signal, that's going to mess up shifting. So there are some very subtle yet unrelated components that most people would overlook checking, and the sport shifts that are problematic shifting cars, you can get to the bottom of. So with the upgrade clutch, with a remap to the transmission control module, the sport shift car is a much more reliable gear system and much better driving car. But there are still questions on these forums that arise, and most of them is because there's one particular garage out there that is saying no, don't do it. I don't know why they would suggest that, because anyone with any knowledge and experience of driving these cars know that the upgrade clutch on a sport shift is just night and day better, night and day transformation. Now, one argument that I've heard and seen lots written is that, well, somebody from the factory told me, or the factory says that these cars were never designed to have a twin plate clutch. Well, let's just sanity check that one for a moment. Let's go back to 04 DB9 manual, which has the Graziano 6-speed transmission. It has a slave cylinder, then it has the clutch assembly, then a flywheel. Now let's look at the 05 V8 Vantage manual. It has exactly the same 6-speed Graziano transmission, torque tube connecting transmission to the back of the engine. It has a spacer, and then it has a clutch and flywheel. So the only difference between an 05 V8 and an 04 DB9 is that the DB9 has a twin plate clutch. The V8 Vantage has a single plate clutch and a spacer. Now that spacer is needed because just prior to production, the bean counters pulled the twin plate clutch that was in the V8 Vantage. So V8 Vantage was originally specified to have this twin plate clutch, but bean counters over engineers decided that it was okay for a single plate clutch to go in that car. It got pulled. The single plate clutch has a shorter stack height than the twin plate clutch, necessitating a spacer to go in between the slave cylinder and the back of the torque tube, whereas DB9 doesn't have one. So the fact that the V8 has a spacer shows you that that twin plate clutch was originally designed to go in V8. It was originally designed to go in V8 Sport Shift. It was pulled at the last minute. So since 05 going to about 2015, they've made, what is it, 30,000 cars with 30,000 spacers in them. They'd have been better off casting the spacer into the torque tube, but they didn't want to do that because that meant changing the torque tube tooling, making it different, V8 to DB9. So they sold 25,000 cars with spacers in. Then in 2015, they decided that that probably wasn't the wisest thing to do. DB9 manual wasn't being made, so you could cast the spacer into the torque tube. And now this is the confusion that they've created, in that exactly the same time they came out with their own twin plate upgrade clutch. So if you have a 2015 onwards V8 Vantage that has the spacer cast into the torque tube, you have to have an older level torque tube sent to you in exchange when you order the twin plate clutch that has the 20 millimeters removed from it, which is what they put into it so they could take away the spacer. So this whole discussion about the V8 was never designed for a twin plate clutch. It is just rubbish. There is a spacer in the car because the twin plate clutch was taken out during original design and development. Next we move on to something that just caught my eye very quickly. Someone is selling an N24 cylinder head. Now whether this was on it's probably on a race car, probably a 4.3, and obviously it's just being sold for its ornament value. But I was just surprised to read that someone's asking questions about them, and the person that posted up said, yeah, they're ported. I shouldn't imagine it makes an enormous difference, to be honest, just tidies up the airflow. Well, this comes from someone that's supposed to know a little bit about cars. You know, there is no replacement for displacement, and power is in the head. Everyone knows this. So the compression ratio of a standard cylinder head is nominal 11.33 to 1. They come from production at about 10.9 to 1, and really optimum is going to be about 12 to 1. So if you look at a 10.9 to 1 compression ratio cylinder head and then compare its performance to a 12 to 1 cylinder head, the difference is enormous. The engine's just going to want to rev up much punchier, much faster, much more responsive. And then you've got the exhaust porting, inlet porting, and if the head's been done properly, then the secondary air injection has been, the orifices have been welded up, and that's been tidied up in airflow. So it's just very surprising to read that someone thinks it's not worth a lot. If you drive a N24 race engine 4.3 versus a standard one, the 4.3 race engine above 5,500 RPM just comes into a second breath of performance, second breath of air, almost like a power band from a two-stroke, and it wants to punch its way to the 7.5 rev limit, where a standard engine is just a bit lackluster to rev up.